Hvala organizatorjem za povabilo in za predlog tovrstne okrogle mize. Sem zelo počaščen, da lahko predstavim profesorja Sweeneyja. Zaprošen sem bil, da uvodni del izvedem v slovenskem jeziku, ampak bom poskušal kombinirati vsaj dva jezika. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. I prepared some introduction for announcement of Professor Sweeney, but I think I will skip it, and I'll ask also David that he concludes his presentation in half an hour so that we have more time for the questions, because I see that here's a great interest for the question. So here on the board we do have a cane and another timeline, but this one is from the perspective of the Slovenian Research Agency, and what I want to stress is the timeline with the government of Republic of Slovenia, when the government adopted quite a bold, let's say, national strategy on open access, and we at the agency are here to perform it. But it was not just a question for our agency, it was the case in all European member organizations of Science Europe, and that was the reason why we started with the initiative of Coalition S. Of course, it was a great time with Plan S from European Commission, and we joined the initiative. We were the first signatories. Today we are in expectation of public release of revised Plan S and implementation plan. And as we already heard within the questions, this question of open access is not related just for the publishing itself, but also to the consortia and the policy to the consortia that provide the scientific literature for scientists. And that is, I find it a very important question, because the idea of open access is, however, accepted, and we are already building or having some infrastructures. So these are three questions. Maybe I would like to see that also our guests would address it if possible. The inclusiveness and the complementarity of standard procedures, and about the robustness of this system, and however the elements of responsibility for implementation, because we really have a multi-stakeholder situation, and that's the reason why we also at the agency established a working group at the very operative level. And now I'm coming to our keynote speaker, and David, please join me. Professor David Sweeney is an executive chair of Research England, and he is also a co-chair of the implementation task force of Science Europe, at this moment with orange background, when we are talking about Coalition S. Another co-chair is Jon Arne Rottingen from Norway Research Council. And David, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. It is a privilege to be here. Although I am here as co-chair of the task force, I do have a job. Sometimes remember that I still have a job back in the UK. That job involves visiting universities. In fact, universities all over the world, as we work through some political issues to do with the European Commission. In the UK, it's important that we establish links. And I have visited universities in most of the major countries of the world in the last 20 years, in the last year even. It is delightful to find that you can step on the campus of any university and it feels much more like a global university than just in its own country. The University of Ljubljana is just fantastic. I feel very much at home here. I'm delighted to be here while the celebration towards the 100th anniversary takes place. I'm also privileged to be in Slovenia. I come actually from Scotland, a small part of the UK. I understand the issues of small countries trying to function on the global stage. And you have achieved so much in establishing your country, which of course has an enormous history. It's also a country where culture is at the heart. Indeed, I think literature is probably one of the things that you are most proud of. So to be in a country which has done so much with an intellectual basis is a treat for me. So thank you for inviting me. I would like just to refer to the previous presentation. For me, open science is largely about doing science better. The other reasons are very good. But doing things better involves, to me, having the insights from the whole of the global research community. I think that different cultures and domains do produce different insights, and those of us that are in some of the major research nations need to have our eyes opened more to the societal drivers and impacts of the research which we do as a worldwide effort. Open science, to me, is a significant way of supporting that, and of course I believe in open access as one of the pillars of that. The background has been covered. We go back a long way to 2002. There has been general agreement, I think, for years that open access is a good thing, and I shall not rehearse the arguments. I'm sure you know them well. We have, let us just be blunt, not succeeded with our push for open access. There you see a graph which shows that not only have we not succeeded, we've largely stalled over the last few years, despite the enthusiasm from the Commission and in many of the individual countries. And that's really the reason why I think Plan S is important, because what we have said so far has not achieved the results. We have to achieve the results. I very much appreciated the Dean's earlier point about the description of radical. In some ways it is not radical. It is restating the policies that there are in many countries, including Slovenia. But we have not managed to implement those policies. And the initial thinking behind Plan S is we cannot do it on our own. Even the Commission cannot do it. We perhaps can do it in a broader coalition that reaches beyond Europe to other countries. Some statistics there about global take-up, and also the UK, where we have had great success, albeit mostly with embargoes, which does not mean full and immediate open access. We have made progress, we have not made sufficient progress, and indeed, as you described in 2016, a target was set in 2020 which we will not reach. Well, I think we will not reach. I think we can now make substantial progress towards it by implementing the Plan S proposals, but it is slow going. Mark Schiltz, the President of Science Europe, has set out the motivation for doing it there. I think the key phrase is we have committed to take a decisive change to a decisive step to change the situation. Now, I can say that, the coalition can say that, the individual funders have got to agree, and universities have also got to agree and participate, as have authors and indeed publishers. They have got to change what they do. We have 10 principles, and I'm not going to talk about all 10, and I'm sure you are familiar with many of them, but I would like to point out the very first thing. You've already mentioned it, Rennie. Retain copyright. We want to move from giving our information, as others have described, to the publishers who talk about their authors and who pretend that they run a peer review system, which in fact, of course, they do organise, and I appreciate that they are doing valuable work in much of what they do, but our authors are the authors of the university, not actually of the funders, although of course we commit to support. And it's right that the decisions about how the material should be used should be taken by authors, or in some countries by the institutions. It depends on the local status of copyright law. I think that is a key step which is often missed. We want the publishers to provide value-added services. We want to pay a fair fee for those value-added services, and I personally do not think that necessarily means a very low fee. I think a fair and reasonable fee is justifiable, but it's for the services they provide, not to take ownership of our information. We are concerned about quality in the second principle, and that very much ties in with the whole open science agenda. We recognise that open access has progressed far quicker in some areas than others, so we've got to take responsibility if we are funders stimulating the system to change for those areas where there are gaps. We have to think about the assessment methods, exactly as already been described. We have to have some words behind fair and reasonable costs so that we can together work that out and listen to publishers. This is not a plan to beat publishers up. This is a plan to challenge publishers to respond and participate collaboratively. And as I shall say shortly, they are actually doing that now in visible ways. In fact, they've been doing that with us for some time in ways that are not be visible, but it is now public. Monographs are really important. I am the largest humanities funder in the UK. I care about that. But we have not yet got to the point where we can form a coherent policy on monographs, and we need to work more closely with the community to do that. We believe in multiple routes, as has already mentioned, repositories and pay-to-publish and open access journals. Now, I already mentioned the hybrid model of publishing is not compliant with the above principles. That principle you may see modified slightly, and of course I can't say what the modification will be in 10 days' time, but you'll be able to work it out from what I say shortly. The funders will monitor compliance. The funders will. There will be no instructions from the Commission that go across the whole of Europe, the whole of Coalition S. Coalition S will not give instructions. This is a responsibility of funders who will learn from each other and work together. But we want the publishers to provide options that we support, and for it to be no challenge at all to authors to comply with their articles. That may sound optimistic. I believe, though, that as we move forward, these things will indeed come together. And in forming the new guidance that we're issuing shortly, we've talked a lot with early career researchers, groups of early career researchers, who we are committed to working with in the future. So what do we aim for? Full and immediate open access. Full means that you can take it forward, typically with a CC BY license, and build on the research that's been done. Immediate means when it's published and not 6 months or 12 months after. We support the new models of academic publishing. Perhaps we didn't say so much about them in the guidance because they are already providing excellent open access options, and the challenges are not in dealing with them. The mention of research assessment, transparent, efficient and fair, a culture for young researchers, but most of all, as I've already said, a collaborative activity with all of the parties engaged. We have 3 routes for compliance. The first route is the traditional open access journal or platform, and the Commission, of course, will be doing more on that. The so-called subscription model with deposit in repositories. In fact, basically the system that works well in the States but with embargoes, and actually has worked well in the UK with embargoes. We don't believe in embargoes. And one of the current developments in the last 2 weeks, there was an article, maybe even last week, an article in Science magazine where publishers were discussing whether you could use immediate deposit in a subscription journal world, and indeed edging towards a conclusion that this may be possible, or as somebody else has put it to me, there is no evidence at all that immediate deposit leads to cancelled subscriptions. And I've also been talking with Learned Society publishers some of who already implement immediate deposit at the Royal Society journals without damage to their business model. So for those who say, and I want to be very clear about this, those who say this is all about so-called gold open access or about pay to publish, that is an option which we think many will want to take up, and indeed traditional open access journals do that already. Some of them, although many of them are the publications funded in other ways. This is about 3 routes, each of which has equal importance and value to us. If we have not adequately explained the role of repositories and immediate deposit in the past, you just wait till next week and we'll try to do it in our revised guidance. Not that I'm allowed to say, of course, what's in the guidance. We also, can I just point out there, hybrid journals under transformative agreements, and this indeed was in the last guidance. This is not new guidance, but it will be, I think, very similar. So that principle that we do not support hybrid, perhaps it needs refined to take account of hybrid journals under transformative agreements. What is a transformative agreement? It's a commitment in some time scale to move to full open access and not to increase the costs by charging for both reading and publishing. Now, these transformative agreements, which are registered on a site called ESAC, are a way of overcoming the hurdles that hybrid journals have provided to open access. You've got to pay twice is a really critical argument. We must stop paying twice. We will not pay twice. So that is the issue in transformative agreements. And transformative agreements are transforming to a new system, so we expect to move to full and open access over a relatively short period. Now, again, people have told us in the past this is too difficult, but it is happening all over the world. The Germans are not formally members of Plan S, and that in itself makes a point that members of Coalition S, this is not just about a coalition of funders. This is about a feeling worldwide that this is an objective, and there may be different implementation routes to get there. In Germany, they have the issue that you legally cannot mandate, so they cannot join us. But nevertheless, they are implementing as leaders the very systems that we are calling for. And of course, in the States, where they do things in an American way, the University of California is publicly going for the same kind of transformative agreement that the Germans have achieved, the Norwegians have just achieved with Elsevier, actually. So this is not a pipe dream. This is not something that cannot be achieved. This is something that can be achieved and is being achieved, no additional cost, a transition to full and immediate open access, sitting alongside the repository route. And really the key factor is, how do you do these kind of agreements? Because there is a bureaucracy around them. There is a cost in effort to doing them. Standing together as a coalition is the way to implement those. There's a cost actually also to the publishers, and we will attempt to work with them to provide smooth paths to transition. So 3 routes, equal importance, all of them working now in some parts of the scholarly system and growing. We've commissioned a gap analysis, as I said. We've got to take responsibility for gaps, and we are discussing ways in which we can encourage open access journals, traditional journals, to move to open access mode, and we're also talking about open access platforms. Within the coalition, there's much expertise on this with the Commission, with bodies such as JISC and NWO. There is plenty of experience on the tools that are required to go open access, and a commitment from the funders to ensure that the tools are present. We do recognise the importance of both fee-free open access journals and platforms, but also that there are some where pay to publish is the route. If that is bound up in a transformative agreement, it means that the author is not paying, It's part of the money flows that are already happening in the negotiation that your libraries, or in some countries, library consortia, are doing. And it eases the task of the consortia considerably. We do want to have transparency about the costs of the services so that we can talk about what is fair and reasonable, but equally to give our publishers the chance to say which services they think they are offering add value. And of course, there's always the question of whether you want all those services. Currently, they're bundled. Perhaps they will continue to be bundled, but please let us have transparency. Transformational agreements, I've already explained. Transitional agreements towards full open access with copyright, with transparency, aiming for equity across different countries and domains. And open archives and repositories. We think that preprints before peer review are good things for discussion. We endorse them. However, if it is right that peer review adds value to the published output, then it is the peer-reviewed version that should be made available. And that's why we see preprints as complementary alongside the push to full and immediate open access for the version of record or the author-accepted manuscript. And again, there some mention of the tools that you need, Sherpa Romeo, in order to make this all work. Now, you mentioned the number of funders, Rennie. Can I say I'm able today to announce a new member, which is not yet on that list. In the Vinnova in Sweden they joined a while ago, but we have issued a press conference this morning to say that they've joined. You will see there an impressive group of European funders, some funders from other parts of the world. Actually, Jordan is missing. Is Jordan missing? Jordan has joined as well as the African Academy of Sciences, and I believe Zambia is also a member. So we're extending our reach. What, though, about the collaboration with other countries? Actually, in the last 3 months, I have spoken to funders from every major research nation: Japan, Korea, China, Brazil, the States, Canada. Who am I missing? As well, of course, as the European ones, but all around the world. Every single one of them shares the aspiration to full and immediate open access. Some of them want to join. Some of them want to work with us because they see the issues as being slightly different in their countries. I think that the strength of joining together will prove important. But I also think that we cannot wait for everyone to join. We need to push forward with the plan because the publishers are responding. In addition to that Science magazine piece, which talks about subscription publishing, you may have noted that Springer Nature have produced a proposal to not only have transformative agreements, which are typically about packages of journals, but transformative journals themselves, and indeed an aspiration from Springer Nature to be viewed as a transformative publisher, where they commit to not charge twice, and they commit to migrate to full and immediate open access. Now, we have been discussing that with them, but we are not commenting on that proposal at this point. I do think, though, Springer Nature said, we are doing this because we want authors to publish in compliant venues. The publishers recognize the necessity of offering options for authors. They do not want to get into a fight which puts authors in a difficult position. We have yet to see whether the Springer Nature proposal or others does prove to be the framework for widespread adoption of open access. I note, if you read the LinkedIn page where Springer Nature published their document, you'll see actually an endorsement from Elsevier and also a very straightforward endorsement, actually, as well as some positive comments from Cambridge University Press. So the idea that all of this is just a long way from realization is not true. We do have to have a time scale that provides the opportunity for engagement with publishers, and that we will make clear next week in announcing our proposals. So I will skip over that because we'll say more about the timescale next week. We want, as public funders, we want the public to be able to read our work. Sometimes that is really very important. In this case, students who just otherwise would not be able to read work because they can't afford to pay subscriptions. In other cases, people with medical conditions who want to study the latest research in order to understand how to support a friend or a relative, or indeed to support their own treatment. These, in principle, are really big issues. I realise that particle physics papers may not be read routinely by the man in the street. They will not be read routinely by me. But the principle really is important, and I think also the principle of working together in a scholarly community. So although we are not saying things immediately about monographs, I don't think that humanities publishing in journals is really very different. We've got to be sensitive to the issues about derivative use of argument and creative outputs, and I think we'll no doubt say more about that. There are issues that are specific to humanities, but in general, I think we want to stick together as multidisciplinary institutions in universities and multidisciplinary funders. So those, I think, are the issues. I've got a list of comments, and I do see Jordan appears on that, so I'm not wrong. Robert Jan has moved to be the president of the Technical University of Eindhoven, and we will have a new champion in due course, and I expect the Commission will also have an open access advocate. But we are working together as a partnership of Coalition S funders. We welcome new members, and we want to push forward. Really, it's delightful to have Slovenia a member and very active in the discussions. We would like to think that we were offering support to you in the implementation path that was to come by being in a larger group. We would also say that we have already learned from talking with your national funder the issues that we may have to word very carefully to support implementation in your country. This will be a success if you are enthusiastic about it, you commit to it, you join with us in addressing the bigger issues already discussed about research assessment, and in your universities the way in which you look at promotion and appointment. I think we can change the method of scholarly communication. We will do so. It is already happening. We just need to do it quicker. The challenge is for you to join us in your support with your national funder. Do you want to do that? Shall we do this together? I hope we will. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your presentation. So it's question time, yes, and I would support more questions than opinions. Of course, opinions are also welcome, but please be short. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, Gregor Majdic from University of Ljubljana. Actually, already wanted to ask that previous speaker, but it's relevant for both. I think one problem with this is publishing costs, which are very high, and we see that the publishers are adapting to this open science policy. This is becoming a multi-million-dollar business for them. For example, Frontier's group of journals, they had published 15,000 articles in 2016, according to them, and that means they earned 30 million euros, which is a lot of money for people. And I think I don't know if it's coincidence, but I think it it's unlikely to be just a coincidence in response that most European countries are moving to open access policy. For example, Frontiers Against, but I'm not wanting to highlight the Frontiers, other publishers are doing the same. They increase their publishing fees up to 50% for some journals. And for example, Nature Communications, open access journals, charges 6,000 euros per publishing. So I think these costs are extremely high. You mentioned once that you plan to address this, and I would like to ask what is your plan, how to address this? I'm also an editor of the journal that we publish in Slovenia. It's Impact Factor Journal, International Journal. So I know a little bit how much cost is to run the journal, and I think these prices are very, very high.
Well, first of all, we're going to aim for transparency because not all of the information you've just mentioned is readily available to everyone. Secondly, when we do transformative deals, and technically, of course, it's not Coalition S that does it, it's the university consortia, the deals are being done within the existing cost. So there is, I think, now proof that moving to open access doesn't necessarily bring extra costs. Of course, anybody who is selling a service will try and charge as much as they can for it. First of all, we attempt to address that by transparency. But secondly, the only way that anybody purchasing anything can complain about the cost is by saying no. And you can see that in Germany, the project deal has just said no. It has done a deal at roughly the same price with Wiley, I think, but it has said no to Elsevier, and discussions appear to have stalled. In California, similarly, the university has said no, and at present I read that the different ways there are of getting access to material, there are many legal ways to get access to material, interlibrary loan and so on, is not inconveniencing the academics. I think this is clearly part of a negotiation, and this is not a negotiation that Coalition S can dictate, but it can work with the university consortia, and the European University Association, I think, has about 60 different groups who are working on consortia. I think you're present in those discussions. So there are ways to do it, but I am not telling you that we are doing this to drive the price down. The primary motivation is full and immediate open access within the existing cost envelope. If you want to focus on driving prices down, then the university consortia are the key players in that.
Thank you. I saw some disagreement also in the audience. Is it correct? Any other question in this topic?
Go on.
Yeah. Thank you. No. Aha. Oh, sorry.
Hi. I had a long list of questions before your talk, but you somehow managed to undermine some of them. My name is Ilya Tomanish Trivunja from University of Ljubljana, but also here as in my other hat, which is the president of European Communication Research and Education Association. And undermining means that you will publish revised guidelines, to which we made some comments in the feedback process. Our main concern was, while we fully support moving to open science, our main fear was that this is somehow driving a wedge between funded research and unfunded research, between institutions that are part of the countries that are part of the coalition and those that are not. Some of the things that also the Dean has mentioned in the introductory speech at the beginning. So my main question is all of this, the implementation of Plan S basically depends on the willingness of publishers to comply. And our main concern was always, what if? What if they will not? What are the implications if this doesn't go as planned? Because to use a really bad metaphor, this in a way reminds me of the Iraq War, where we have a coalition of the willing and a lot of known unknowns, and you basically ask us to trust you on implementation of this plan, while the documents that were publicly available to us were very sketchy, very intransparent, and raised a whole lot of questions. And they're not only for Coalition S, but also for national founders. There will apparently be a long and painful transition period in which we think scientists will be very exposed to different frictions. So I'm very much looking forward to reading the comments, and I hope that there will be another feedback.
Well, yes, I sort of feel that we were criticised because we were very clear that we wanted a 2020 date. We did say there was a transition period, but perhaps we were not very explicit about the transition period. We will be more, we have already been a bit more explicit, we will be further, give you further details next week. But if we are being criticised for moving too quickly and then being criticised for a long transition period, we're in a no-win situation. I don't see why a transition period need be painful. I do agree with you that the publishers have got to work with us. I mean, I've been talking to, well, hundreds of publishers in the last 6 months, but none of that is visible. I know that they all want to maintain their authors. Yes, we could get to the stage where we are, I don't like using the metaphor of war, actually, and that's a bit strong, but we could be at a point where we are considering compliance measures that are very difficult. That is not in the interests of the publishers to lose papers, and it's not in the interests of either the funders or the authors. So I am optimistic that we'll come to a conclusion, and for the first time, as I say, in the last 2 weeks, there is just solid evidence. If Springer Nature say we want to be compliant, then the only issue is, right, how do we get there? Not the principle. If Elsevier say we support Springer Nature's position, again, the argument is how do you get there? Transformative agreements are not painful. I think it's because they are centrally organised, they take all of the pain away from the author. And I think it's interesting that Elsevier currently is not so keen on doing transformative deal with either Germany or California, but they have done one with the Norwegians. And I think that makes the case that it's not about the principle of doing it this way, it is about negotiating a cost-effective way of delivering, and you then come up against the comments that were being made here of what we can afford. So I do think most of your worries are not well founded, unless indeed we move to very substantial disagreement. But it's not about a gap between Coalition S funders and the rest, because many funders that are not part of the coalition want to sign up to transformative agreements. It is about us standing together on some difficult issues. I'm not going to pretend there won't be some difficult issues, but the alternative is to say the publishers are in control. We can do nothing to fulfill a policy objective that we've had since 2001 and which our governments have had for some years now. Are we going to say we've failed in a policy objective, we've let the publishers take control? That's, I think, an issue for us all to consider.
Thank you. So if there are no more questions in this part, yes, one short question.
So we are talking about the articles, the research that will be done in the future and published in the future. What about the knowledge that we already have and it has been published? So what about the articles that are already published and are now behind the paywall? Is anybody discussing this or students will still have to use the Science Hub, the legal way to get to them? To these articles?
Most of the agreements that are in place do give historic access to material. It's why the withdrawal of access in Germany is only the withdrawal of access to stuff that has been newly published, perhaps since the 1st of January 2018. I'm not sure of the exact dates, but historic stuff is still available, and many publishers have an embargo but make the material available when the embargo finishes. The focus of Plan S is on the future, I do think there will be some legacy issues that we will have to discuss, but that has got to be built into the agreements that university consortia do. We have no lever as funders with the publishers to talk about that, but it's a critical issue. I suspect we'll be asked to come to some appropriate arrangement on that, but that is one for the universities to come to agree with.
Thank you for your keynote, and thank you for answers to our questions. Thank you.